some agency owners that I've spoken to, and I know some of them I work with, have a tendency to kind of see sales as this optional on and off thing. But a healthy pipeline is never going to be healthy unless it's always on. So there's always someone that's putting leads in that funnel that's generating new opportunities. And it's not like a tap that you can just switch on and off. You've got this one client in particular that's generating 40-50% of your revenue. It's not a problem necessarily. It's great you have them, but we're going to want to try and diversify things a bit here soon, because that is a stressor, or that's a strain on the owner. Because if that client leaves, which can happen, then all of a sudden from a cash flow standpoint or financial view, you're going to hurt. You ask the question, what skill or knowledge area is tough for them to excel at? And I think anything to do with hiring, people management, helping people thrive in their business, leading, that takes, from my viewpoint, that takes probably a lifetime to excel at.
Ross, so you are a agency coach to a lot of agency owners. And one thing that I've seen you comment on a lot of stuff and do posts on LinkedIn this year is that there's this whole doom and gloom that 2024 wasn't a good year for agency owners. But I've seen a lot of your comments and your posts kind of saying the opposite. And again, we did an agency owner anonymous survey where we interviewed 55 agency owners, and we sat down and I think it was like 20 odd questions. And what we've seen across the board was that most agencies have actually grown in revenue this year. So what have you got to say about that, Ross?
So I think I'll preface this first of all, like the context to what I see is that it's quite a small sample size, in fairness. Like, I mean, I've spoken to about 250, 300 agency owners over the last 18 months. I work with usually between 12 and 15 every month. And that's great. But also, they're generally of a certain size. So these are typically agencies that are usually around sub 2 million in annual revenue. But that said, yeah, like for the most part, I would agree with what your survey showed, which is that for the most part, they've done very well. So for the most part, they've either stayed the same as they were in 2023, or they have grown. And definitely going into this year, the vast majority of the ones I'm working with, the intention is to really grow and grow quite a lot, which is brilliant. So it certainly goes against the narrative I have seen then in places like LinkedIn, where, yeah, it's been a bit doom and gloom. And, it's not just me as well. Like, I speak with quite a few other agency coaches or consultants, and again, they see something similar to what we're seeing, which is a bit of a brighter picture. So I suppose I sit here and say, I don't have exposure to the larger agencies. I don't know what they see, but what I see and what some others I've spoken to have said, it's definitely going in a much better direction than maybe some people have suggested. And, that's just their view in it. But I certainly think we can maybe look at things a bit more optimistically based on what I've seen in the last 18 months, is, I suppose, my general point. And I think one last broader point on this, I do personally believe that any challenges, or the general sense I'm getting, is that this is a bit of a fallout from COVID. So a lot of businesses were set up during COVID, and the vast majority of them had to be digital for obvious reasons. And I think that lends itself to freelancers or maybe agencies or services being set up. And the reality is, as you probably well know, and most people listening to this know, so many businesses don't make it past year 2 or year 3. And I think now, honestly, it's tough to say to an extent, but a lot of the businesses set up during COVID, plenty of them will not be around this year, next year. And it's unfortunate, but I think that's also something you're going to see a bit of as well. So yeah, that's kind of my overview of it, I suppose.
Yeah, we're seeing that a lot right now. There's agencies that you think that are going to be around forever, and you're seeing them go bust. And it's the same, unfortunately, with redundancies. There's a lot of great hires that have been made, and now they're getting to the point where the company can't actually keep them on anymore. And we're just seeing redundancies a lot right now, which isn't nice to see. But yeah, it kind of shows that we are in an economic downturn, and whether that came from that boom in COVID, we're seeing that now. But let's just take the pool of candidates or clients that you've got, Ross. So during that economic downturn, what kind of strategies have worked best for them for growth?
I think anything that relates to, anything that's related to a downturn or tougher market conditions, for the agencies doing well in it, it's the things they've done when the times have been better in advance of that tougher period that have set them up really well for this. I think if you're in a tough period economically and you're not doing well, or if things are tough for you, it's going to be very hard to dig yourself out of that. And you probably just have to accept that you're not going to be able to as fast as you might want to. But the agencies that I'm working with that have done well in the last, say, 12, 18 months, it's because of the work they did 1.5, 2 years ago, or maybe even 3 years ago. So again, we'll probably get into it, but it's looking at things like cash flow. It's being sensible of cash. It's having respect for money when the times are good and not being so greedy, or maybe not over investing or over hiring, to your point even. And it's been probably quite realistic in the view that, say, 4 or 5 years ago when things were going really well, that something's going to come down the line. So you have to prepare for that. And then in the shorter term, just to speak about strategies, I mean, it certainly helps maybe if you're not exposed to like a single market or a single industry as an agency. I think you can probably niche down a bit too far and put yourself in like if you'd been focused on travel, for example, as an agency during COVID, yeah, it's going to be tough for you. So things like that. But again, I think that's harder to predict. The broad point there for me is just the people I'm working with that are currently doing well. It's because they've had the attitude that, look, things are going well now, let's save, or let's kind of get things in line for when things aren't, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm going to absolutely butcher it, but a quote my dad always mentions is, was it when the tide is high, everybody's swimming, but when it goes out, you can see who's really wearing swim shorts or something like that. But yeah, you said quite a few points there that I'd love to touch on, Ross. So cash flow, for one, it's one thing that I wish when I started my business, I was able to see and hear a lot more and get a lot more advice on. But cash flow can be a really tough thing to manage. How do you advise your clients to deal with cash flow?
Well, honestly, the first thing I say to them or ask them is, do you have someone from a financial background, be it an accountant or a CFO, that can help you? And that's not me passing the buck off to someone. The reality is, I would encourage anyone run the business to get someone in that front helping, or in that front helping you. That's probably point one. I think point two then comes from what we just said, which is, it's kind of like if you think about yourself in a personal sense, actually. So, if you're like starting to save or starting to earn, I mean, practical advice is to try and first of all build up a bit of an emergency pot, so that like if you have to do work to the car, or if you have to maybe have some type of a medical procedure or whatever it might be, you have a small pot there that can cover those types of things. And honestly, when I think of the word cash flow for a business, I just think of the same type of thing. It's like if you have a bad couple of months for whatever reason, you have cash in reserve to pay your employees, or you have cash in reserve to keep things going while you're maybe pushing extra hard to win the sales. So I suppose those 2 points are the main things that come up for me. It's kind of just practical stuff, but equally, if you want the more specific advice on things like cash flow, go to someone that can advise you on that, because again, there are plenty of accountants out there. There are plenty of, and again, I think one thing I've seen a lot of recently is brilliant is, it's almost like that fractional CFO service, that there are some people out there doing that really well for agencies specifically now. And even on LinkedIn, like there are people on LinkedIn that are putting out phenomenal advice just for free on there. So I think that's probably the main two places I point people to on that front in general.
Awesome. Shout out to my friend Joe Akik. He's doing great finance stuff on LinkedIn. But yeah, honestly, we started the business when I was 23. And at the time, it was just all right. We need to get clients, we need to get invoices out. And it was not looking into taxes and everything else. And honestly, it's something that I wish that I looked at the very start, because yeah, I don't enjoy going through QuickBooks and all of that when there's a massive mess in there.
Yeah, I think even just one more point that's more specific to agencies is, and this is something you don't really need to think about too much early on, but again, most of my clients will be at that stage where I'm saying, okay, you've got this one client in particular that's generating 40-50% of your revenue. It's not a problem necessarily. It's great you have them, but we're going to want to try and diversify things a bit here soon, because that is a stressor, or that's a strain on the owner. Because if that client leaves, which can happen, then all of a sudden from a cash flow standpoint or financial view, you're going to hurt. So even just on that as well, it's understanding where your revenue is coming from, and trying to build the agency in a way that's a bit more diverse than just, again, having maybe one or two large clients.
Fantastic. Okay, cool. So you mentioned people possibly niching down too much. So that's something that I'd love to talk about, because yeah, you hear it kind of everywhere. That's the advice, that you should become the specialist within the niche and niche down as much as you can. But what do you mean by people can niche down too much?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm certainly not going to claim any original insights on this one. I mean, a large percentage of my views on positioning and niching come from David Baker. So I'd imagine plenty of people listening to this will have heard of David and some of his books or work. I think fundamentally, in the same way you can target far too wide a pool of people or businesses, you can go the other way. And, as a quick example, if I say, for example, I work with agencies, well, I mean, that's quite broad, right? I mean, that could be any type of agency I could be doing any type of work with them. If I were to then say that I work with agencies with less than 5 employees based in Belfast, Northern Ireland, I think it might be quite a tight pool of people / almost zero. And niching too, that's an extreme example, obviously. But when I say niching too tightly, it generally relates to maybe going for maybe a specialist area. So, for example, maybe just paid ads for a specific industry, and then you maybe have something else that, again, narrows it further for you. So for me, it just depends what space you're in. But like, if you're a graphic designer, maybe you specialize in work for a certain type of business, that's fine. But you don't want to go too far, I suppose. And again, I would recommend to anyone setting out on their agency journey, or as I do to many of my clients, there's lots of material from people like David Baker or others on positioning. A lot of the stuff is already out there. It's great for us. We can read things like this. But the other way to look at it as well, and what I see a bit with some clients, is it then hinders your ability to actually grow. So I'm not saying you can't set up an agency that's quite tightly positioned, but it maybe gets to that point where you find yourself capped as to how far you can go with it, which is not really what you want, I guess. So that's all I mean by that point.
Yeah, it's funny because we had Chris Dreyer on before, and he went into it as well. I think he's got a book called Niching Down, but he talked about it as well. He was like, location niching is such a silly thing. It's like, okay, we've got all these clients and we're set up in Miami, but the clients decide to move to Austin. What? We're not going to do the best for them in Austin. We're just going to let them go. But yeah. So in terms of your clients, Ross, what's one of the hardest skills that you see across the board or knowledge area that you've seen agency owners struggle with?
I mean, I'll answer that in two ways. So firstly, the owners themselves, I think it's having patience, because a lot of them, and it even comes back to something we mentioned earlier, a lot of them can be impatient. They're not getting sales quick enough, they're not growing fast enough. Maybe, the work we're doing isn't being done quick enough for clients, or whatever it might be. A lot of the best agencies I've spoken to or I've worked with are ones that have been operating for 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years and have the intention to keep going. So my view is very much we want to build a healthy, profitable agency. And yeah, like if you get to the point where you can sell it at some point, that's great. But for the most people, it's trying to build something that they can run for a sustained period of time. And that requires patience. And I think a lot of the people that I've spoken to that maybe have just set up their business or are in the first 2-3 years, they just want to get to maybe these revenue milestones as quickly as possible. And I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm just saying I think it probably lends itself to a more sustainable, healthier business if you can have the patience and take like a 5-10 year view on this. And then the other side of it is more specific to run the business. And I think anything relating to people is really tough. And, it obviously falls into your realm, hiring, for example. Like, you ask the question, what skill or knowledge area, can they be, it's tough for them to excel at. And I think anything to do with hiring, people management, helping people thrive in their business, leading, that takes, from my viewpoint, that takes probably a lifetime to excel at, truthfully, or a long time to become an expert at, if that's even a thing. And I don't think there are shortcuts to it, honestly. I think there's a huge amount, like even in my time as managing director of an agency, I think back to a lot of stuff we did really well, but there's a huge amount that you wish you could have done better. And there's a huge amount you learn from simply even hiring one person, let alone hiring dozens. So, and again, even to that point, I think it's a good example of where there are no shortage of like leadership books or materials out there, but it's something I think you have to actually do and probably get your hands dirty and experience what it's actually like to lead a group of people as an agency owner, to understand really how to do it well, because it's not easy and it's really tough. And yeah, I mean, that's probably the one thing for me. And the main reason I say that is 75-80% of an agency's costs probably relate to people anyhow, or up to that. So it's a huge part of their business. And if they want to grow it, they kind of have to either get someone else in to help them do it really well, or else understand how to do it themselves, I suppose, if that makes sense.
Quick pause. If you're getting value from this conversation about scaling agencies and hiring top talent, I want to share something that might help you. Are you struggling to find A players for your digital marketing agency? We've got you covered. For SEO experts who turn rankings into revenue, head to SEOforhire.co. For paid media specialists who boost your bottom line, check out paidmediajobs.com. And if you're looking for foot rubs, you're definitely in the wrong podcast. All right, let's jump back into the episode. I love that. I also love that you touched on patience at the start there. We've got a client called Eric Sue. I'm not sure if you know him. He owns Single Grain over in America. But he's got a few podcasts. But yesterday he did his first. It was like a business vlog podcast, and it's just him walking to the office talking about a load of things. But what I thought was really interesting, and something that he talks about a lot, is planning within the decades. And he recommended a book called 3HAG, which I ordered yesterday, which is about planning in like a year at a time. Years go so fast and it's hard to like properly get the goals. So he plans within 3 years, which means you've got 12 quarters. And he just says it's such a better way. It gets the team more involved for like the longer vision of the purpose of the business and things like that. So I love that you mentioned patience on that.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. I mean, for what it's worth, when I start working with someone, one of the first questions I ask them is, I mean, what's your ambition with this? Because I need to understand, what's important to them. And, it's good to understand that. But generally speaking, then we quite quickly try and establish what they want it to look like and feel like as a business in the next 1 to 3 years. Because it is a good time range. There's no doubt about it. And then you can come back into, monthly and quarterly kind of tasks and objectives. But yeah, I think that's a wise time frame to look at, basically.
Awesome. And Ross, what are the key elements to having a healthy agency pipeline?
I would say it goes back to something I said earlier as well. So a healthy pipeline comes from preparation, or it comes from putting the time in advance of when you really feel like you're going to need this pipeline to be functioning really in a really efficient way. First and foremost, I think some agency owners that I've spoken to, and I know some of them I work with, have a tendency to kind of see sales as this optional on and off thing. So a healthy pipeline is never going to be healthy unless it's always on. So there's always someone that's putting leads in that funnel, that's generating new opportunities. And it's not like a tap that you can just switch on and off. And one thing I read about a lot is you see that more when things are going really well. So if an agency, for example, is doing, let's say, just under $1 million a year, and maybe they've hired a few people recently and it's going really well, they might think, okay, right, I'll take a few months now and ease off on the sales front. 6 months time, when they really want to start growing again, or when they really want to maybe win a few more clients, the pipeline will be drier or it'll be quieter, and they'll maybe wonder why. And it's because they eased off on things. So it always has to be on someone who's clearly responsible for driving those leads. And then again, I think a lot of the time, people who don't have a healthy pipeline ask the question, like, what am I doing wrong? And they think it might be, maybe I didn't invest enough in paid ads, or maybe I didn't do enough on LinkedIn, or maybe I didn't go to enough events. for me, a lot of the time when I look at it, it's that they don't really know who should be in the pipeline. They don't know maybe who the right people are to work with, or they don't understand those people well enough. And it comes back to even that positioning point. Like, I think the vast majority of people I've worked with in the last year and a half haven't really thought about that too much in enough depth. And I'm not saying they don't work with great clients, but it's kind of been by chance, or it's one of those scenarios where they might get the right person in the door, but they might not. So healthy pipeline to me means, yeah, plenty of opportunities, but it also means the right people. That's healthy. It's not lots of leads, large numbers, lots of opportunities, but they're a mixed bag, if that makes sense.
Awesome. And Ross, what's the most common operational nightmare story that you hear from agency owners when they first come to you?
Good question. Actually, in general, I'd say it's everything being reliant on the owner themselves. That is an operational nightmare from my viewpoint, because everything else is very difficult to improve if every single thing happening either is done by the owner or goes through the owner. And that's quite common, right? I mean, until you have probably at least 5-6 people, the owner's going to be really heavily involved. And again, most of the clients I work with are probably in that range where they're either just coming out of that period, or they're about to start building a team. And up until that point, the business is the owner. So, like, if you even think of ourselves, like, we're very much, I'm just on my own, so it's obviously all me. You've got a couple of people with you now, which is great, but you're very heavily involved. As you grow it, then you don't become disconnected, but your role just changes. And an operational nightmare is when that isn't something the owner wants to embrace or doesn't really get. So they feel maybe they still have to be really involved, or they should be seeing everything, or they want things done a certain way. And that's where micromanagement or almost blocking progress becomes an issue. So I think it's understandable. I think it's very tough to let go of stuff. I think it's very tricky for an owner to make a shift from probably doing everything themselves to all of a sudden just letting people at it and giving them a lot of control. But it has to happen if you want to build the 2, 3, 4, 5+ million a year agency, basically. And it definitely happens gradually, but yeah, I'd say that's the most common one. There's lots of different things operationally then beyond that, but yeah, in a broad sense, that's probably the main thing.
I love that. We had Jason Hennessy on recently, and he said that he brought in a business coach when they were doing 5 to 10 million a year. And the biggest lesson the business coach taught him was he needed to step back from the CEO position and become the founder. And he said that one thing, and obviously a lot of other things, but that was the one thing that helped the business go to 25 million a year.
Yeah, I believe it for sure. And I think it's a great point in general. One thing I always try and learn about owners I work with over time is what role maybe they can move into. And even if it's not something that happens when I work with them, it's something they should have in mind, because I know firsthand from working with an owner, they were not the person that wanted to be a managing director or even really a CEO. They had no interest in that. They had interest in parts of the business that they were really passionate about, that they wanted to spend time on when it made sense. They didn't want to have conversations about HR, financial matters, or even client problems. It wasn't for them. And I think you see that a lot. But some people, again, it's that kind of accidental CEO scenario where someone who's really good at something, it's their craft, ends up operating in that type of role. So, and it can be hard to let go of. Again, it's the same point. It's very hard as an owner. You kind of feel obliged probably to stay as the CEO, so to speak.
Awesome. And I saw across a few of your LinkedIn posts that you mentioned that you help dysfunctional teams become organized and autonomous. Have you got a framework for that?
Yeah, I mean, yes, and I'll then add a no to that. So, I mean, yes, there's a framework in my mind for running an agency. So there's, I see it as having basically 5 key components, is what I say to clients. So you've got the owner themselves, you've got people, processes, clients, and pipeline. So those 5 components to me are, they're integral to how an agency functions. Of course, there are best practices under each. There are different maybe systems or processes or things that I would always encourage anyone I work with to do. There are things that we roll out. Maybe there's some templates. Maybe there's some procedures we follow to really just try and sharpen up the agency. But all that said, put one agency that I've worked with beside another, and yeah, those 5 things exist and they're present, but one owner might be exceptionally good at selling, another one might be really not interested or terrible at it. So how I approach my work with them is going to be quite different. What we prioritize is going to be quite different. But that framework is there. I mean, those are the 5 things that I used or generally had in mind when I was running an agency. I thought about those 5 things quite often. Typically on a quarterly basis, you might have 1 or 2 key things under 1 or 2 of those components that are, really important for you. But yeah, I mean, that's generally how we think about it when it comes to working. I work month on month with people. So, next month, for example, people might be a focus for one of my clients that's done really well. So we're looking at maybe a bit of a restructure or adding more people to the business. Another client, it might be pipeline, to the point of this conversation. Maybe their pipeline was a bit up and down last year. So we look at how we can kind of sort that out. So that's generally what I lean on to help people, if that sounds like a framework.
Awesome. And my last question for you, Ross, is so you obviously deal with a lot of agencies and they've all got different problems, different strengths. What's some of the best advice that you could give to agency owners out there that you kind of see from looking across all these diverse agencies? What's the best advice you could give them to grow?
Specifically for agencies doing less than 1 to 1.5 million a year, I would say the vast majority of them are probably overcomplicating the business for themselves. And what I mean by that is, you don't need to be rolling out new services every quarter, every year. You don't need to be adding lots of new products. You don't need to be trying to tap into loads of new markets. You don't even need to have that many people. You just need some good people around you, some good systems that help you deliver exceptional work. And fundamentally, you just need to really offer something that is genuinely helping a group of businesses. I'm probably oversimplifying it, if anything, but I think the vast majority of people I work with have almost looked at their challenges like they've tried to solve it with too many different things. Again, even pipeline specifically, trying all sorts of different sales strategies, changing how they onboard clients every other month. I think it just becomes, they almost get in their own way. And if you've built an agency to say 500, 600K a year in revenue, you're clearly doing something really well. It probably is just a case of continuing that and then sharpening the ways and how you serve clients. So yeah, I mean, even to summarize that, I'd say simplify how you function and how you run the business. But at the end of the day, it comes back to the clients. If you're doing great work for a client, you're probably going to do okay, I think, long term. But yeah, it's maybe easier said than done. So hopefully I'm not oversimplifying that. But I think it comes back to just honing in on that thing that you can do really, really well.
Fantastic. Well, look, Ross, thank you so much for coming on. If there's any agency owners that want to maybe see some of your content or maybe get in touch to hopefully get coached, where can they find you?
LinkedIn. I'm almost entire. I think it's at the moment mainly the only place I put content. So that might change, but for now, LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ross.
Cool. Thanks, Josh.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed that video and got some kind of value from it. If you did, please make sure to leave a comment in the comment section and let me know any feedback that you have for future videos. And of course, hit that subscribe button because we will be releasing videos every single week. So you're going to want to stick around. Thank you and see you in the next one.